with Rick Berman. I'm Brandon Braga. This is a reunion of sorts. Rick and I haven't seen each other in 17 years.
We had lunch 2 years ago.
We had lunch 2 years ago. We had dinner with Manny Cotto.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're here to talk about Enterprise. Or Star Trek Enterprise, probably at this point. When Rick first got the idea for this show, and I remember the phone call that I got when Rick approached me to be involved, the whole concept behind the show was to make it Star Trek that was closer to people today. A Star Trek where we had spent so much time in outer space in spandex outfits. We were eager to have people, you used to say, wear tennis shoes and be more grounded. And therefore Star Trek was left, I think it was your idea to leave Star Trek out of the title.
Well, we had Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek The Experience. All the movies had Star Trek in them. And the feeling was that since we were going to name this Enterprise, which I don't know who came up with that title, but the idea that who on earth would not know that a TV show that had to do with, even if they didn't know it had to do with space, a TV show called Enterprise, it's a pretty easy bet that it's a Star Trek show. But the network, after a couple of years, decided that
for Star Trek,
the way to help the ratings was to throw the word Star Trek onto the front of it. So I can represent Enterprise, and you can represent Star Trek Enterprise.
Of course, it only got good once it was called Star Trek Enterprise.
Exactly. No, it only got good when Manny
Cotto, of course, the Manny Cotto season.
Right, Manny Cotto saved the show. So we were just there setting up 3 years for Manny to come in, and he blew it.
It's interesting, Rick. I was in London for this big Star Trek convention that they were doing there. I turned it into a little bit of a vacation. But what was interesting, it was a rather large one, tens of thousands of people. What was interesting was, from my perception, people had the most questions about Enterprise, and people were most interested in that show. Like, that show had a huge following there, more so than most Star Trek conventions here seem to be next generation oriented or whatnot. But Enterprise was hugely popular at this Star Trek convention. It had a big presence there, and there was no, I hate to use the word stigma, but Enterprise came under a tremendous amount of scrutiny, and it was a great show. I'm more proud of a lot of the work we did on Enterprise than any of the other Star Trek shows. If you look back at it, it's kind of the pilot. I think. I mean, I don't want to sound self-aggrandizing, but I think it's the best Star Trek pilot all around. Maybe in part because the people making it had been there a while and had worked on all of them and had perfected what they were doing. I don't know, but it's. What do you think?
Well, it was the first pilot that opened with a cornfield shot.
Right.
That has a lot to do with it. Or did it? No, it opened with a. I think it opened with a kid painting
a model.
The kid painting the model.
Archer and his father.
No, I thought the pilot was terrific. The job of doing a pilot is you've got to introduce 8 or 9 people. You have to, in a way, introduce the relationships they have with one another, what their backstory is, why they are brought together, what they're going to be doing in the course of 100 episodes or more. And I think we managed to bring together a group of wonderful actors. One of the things I'm most proud of has been the casting. I think that, forgetting the Patrick Stewarts and the Brent Spiners and the people that get all the accolades, people like Sadig, people like Colomini, Renee, I was going to say Echeverria, Renee Auberjonois. We've had some really remarkable people who have come in and played these roles. People, John Billingsley, Dominic Keating. We put together a great cast.
Yeah, we did. And, for me, this was the first show I was involved with from the ground up. I mean, I was around for Voyager, but I didn't cast the other shows, and I wasn't involved in the conception of the other shows. So it was a very new experience for me, and it seemed to me that Enterprise was cast very easily. I mean, we had trouble finding Jolene's character. You know, I think maybe it's the last person cast, and it's usually difficult to cast the ingenue who playing a Vulcan who can act and all whatnot. But it seemed easy. Was it compared to the other shows? I mean, Billingsley walked in the door, as you might recall, and he did an audition, and that was that. We knew he was the guy, and his performance in the audition is identical to the scene in the show. He just
absolutely.
And I remember Connor. I mean, we didn't. It wasn't a struggle. How did it compare to the others?
I remember Dominic Keating had come in to read for a role in an episode of Voyager, and he got done. And I went to Junie and I said, "We have created a character named Malcolm in Enterprise, and we can't put this guy in Voyager. So tell him he's not getting the job, but we've got something bigger for him waiting."
Interesting.
And he was and he was terrific. The casting was good. Casting the beautiful woman in a show is always a bitch. I remember it was very hard on Deep Space Nine because we had to find a woman who was not only beautiful and a good actor, but who also had the wisdom of somebody who was supposed to be like hundreds of years old. When Jolene came in, she kind of nailed it.
Ray, there are a couple of things I want to, if you recall, try to, I may be misremembering.
Oh, I do nothing but misremember.
Okay, well, maybe we'll misremember together, but when we first talked about the show, weren't we talking initially about doing something that was purely a prequel? There was no futuristic element initially. There was no temporal Cold War. That was added later in the development process. And something even more grounded, did we at one time talk about setting part of the first season on Earth with the construction of the first ship and really like launching that ship and doing something that's quite frankly scared the studio? They wanted something set in the future, first of all. They wanted something that's set in Next Generation's time. And a prequel made them nervous, and doing something too prequely made them even more nervous. Am I right about remembering that?
You are right, because I remember at one point one of the studio people saying, "This prequel idea is really cool, but maybe we should save that for the next one." They said, "Why don't you do the opposite? Go like to the 26th century,"
right,
or something like that. And our response was, so the spandex is a little tighter, the ships will go warp 14.
The phasers are smaller.
Yeah.
What is more future than the 24th century?
There was definite the idea of people wearing jeans, and didn't we have? These are all things that are just coming to me. I think we actually wrote scenes that took place in Chinatown, in what's almost the present.
I think you're right. Oh my God, I forgot about that.
So had I.
Yeah.
And they didn't.
Yeah, they weren't into it.
Yeah, we did make it. We ended up in the pilot making a reference where Phlox talks about how much he loves the Chinese food.
Chinese food on Earth.
In San Francisco, because that's where Starfleet is.
Right. Because I remember talking about setting, again, in the development stages, people in the mud on Earth, building the starship, getting ready to be the first people out there. And I have an emotional recollection of being disappointed that we weren't being permitted to go as far back as we wanted to go, and sensing from the studio, rightly or wrongly, that they never really fully endorsed the idea, that they were tolerating the prequel idea, and they kind of forced us into creating the temporal Cold War, which, by the way, is a cool idea in its own right. And in a way, the show became a prequel and a sequel, because the temporal Cold War took place in the 29th century, so they kind of got what they wanted.
Well, we also had something that I can't think of any other television show that had, which was our pizza development lunches with Kerry in my office. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
So here's Kerry McCluggage, who's like the chairman of Paramount Television, a big shot, who said, "Do you guys mind if I come in and sit in on some of these early development meetings?"
Yeah, I forgot about this.
And I had a table in my office, big table, glass top table, and Kerry would come in. And this was not the kind of guy who'd come to your office. This was the kind of guy you would go to his office. He'd come into the office. He'd take his jacket off, because he always wore a suit. He'd roll his sleeves up, and he'd sit down at the table, and we would eat pizza. And we would talk development of Enterprise.
Yeah, I completely forgot that happened. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that was weird.
But I think the key to the development of Enterprise, to me, had to do with First Contact. Because First Contact, which had been done in whatever year it was done, it was, I guess, 96. We based somewhat on canon, Star Trek canon, which is something that Manny respects and Brandon and I don't.
Rumor has it.
I'm being facetious. We had a kind of a post-apocalyptic Earth where things were a mess, and we had James Cromwell as an alcoholic scientist, and he creates the first warp drive. And this is all connected with a story having to do with our next generation characters finding a way to go back in time to save the world, which what every movie was about. The idea that in the 21st century, which I think it was the late 21st century that Zefram Cochrane invents warp drive.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 23rd century, you've got Kirk and Spock and a perfect Earth and Starfleet and the Federation and these huge spaceships with hundreds of people on board. What happened between those two things? What happened between First Contact when we first meet an alien, the Vulcans, at the very, very end?
Mm-hmm.
You wrote it. You should remember it. What happened between that and Kirk when there were hundreds of worlds that they were traveling? And we thought, what a great idea it would be to find a spot somewhere in between when man was nervous, tenuous. The whole idea of going out into space was something that the Vulcans kept telling us we weren't ready for. And to see the first starship. So the thought was, well, a ship that has a warp 1 or warp 2 capability could only get to a tiny little bit of the galaxy, maybe find 1 or 2 planets that had human beings on it. But if we could start the series at a time where, like warp 5 had been developed, that would truly open up the quadrant to space travelers, that would be a great time to see the first humans that went out into space. So I think that was the premise that kind of got it all going. That feeling of what happened between that muddy world where everybody was living in First Contact on Earth, and the world of Kirk and Spock, which was just a couple hundred years later.
Yeah, it sounds great hearing you describe it. It was a great inspiration. And I think there were some inventions. One of my favorite, if not my favorite invention in the show, which turned out to be very controversial with fans, was that the Vulcans were antagonistic, that they were, they seemed great when they walked off the ship in first contact, but it would be a tumultuous relationship with the humans because they felt that they knew best, and they didn't think we were ready, and perhaps we weren't ready. Because one of the great things in the pilot I love is a really simple premise that we have to take a Klingon back to his homeworld, and we lose him like in the first leg of the journey. He's kidnapped,
and that we have because of her scientific knowledge of space maps and things like that, we have this chick who is not only a Vulcan, but even has more of a sense of disgust for humans than any of the other ones.
Doesn't like the way they smell.
Doesn't like the way they eat. Doesn't like their attitude. And she is assigned to join the ship. So one of these antagonistic Vulcans ends up coming on board, and then we have our normal complement of humans. But it was great because, like Hoshi, there was no such thing as a universal translator, and Hoshi was just a linguist with a great ear. And he has to go down to South America or somewhere and talk her into coming on board the ship.
Or that Malibu.
It was Malibu, but it was supposed to be South America. Whenever you see jungle, it's always Malibu. Then we decided to put a alien that we had never seen before, which was Phlox, on the ship. And Travis Montgomery, who played the role, I thought this was a great idea. I think this was your idea. He was a boomer, we called him. And he was like he was in like a Warp 1 ship. He'd grown up his whole
Born in a ship, never been
life,
to Earth.
Being somebody who's like, he came from a family that were like transport people. They were like worked on space freighters and dealt with a tiny little part of the galaxy because they barely could go Warp 1. But he had been to other planets. He had seen other species. Now Phlox, I don't know how Phlox was. I think Phlox was brought to Earth by the Vulcans.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was there to take care of Tiny. Remember?
Yeah.
What was his name?
Tiny Lister. Though there's some things that you think are cool when you first create a show, like the Space Boomer idea, that didn't really go anywhere. I think we did one Space Boomer episode, but what sounded good on paper, born and raised in space, never been to Earth, what's their perspective? When everyone gets on a ship week to week, it's kind of like, who cares what the boomer has to say?
And the same thing was true. It's like we came up, we had a great kind of James Bondy sort of line. Malcolm gives Archer a box with 2 guns in it. And he said, these are called phase pistols. Mm-hmm. They've got 2 settings. And one is called stun and the other is kill. Be careful that you
don't get them confused.
So it was a great line. But the point is that in the course of the episode, he uses the phaser. And once that's done, it's done.
The novelty's gone.
Right. And it was the same thing about in the pilot, and transporters had never ever been used for anything biological before. They were just used for transporting equipment. And there's a scene between Trip and Malcolm where they talk about the fact that this thing can have biological matter transported, and it's like the big gag about what someone says, yeah, well, you mean fruits and vegetables, and his answer, I think, is no, they mean science officers and weapons officers or whatever. But it's used to beam Archer back on board the ship. Well, that's the gag. The gag's over then. Right? Well, it's the same thing. I mean, it's like people are no longer really afraid of the transporter.
Been proven. And I don't think we never really used the transporter. We always took these shuttle pods, which we spent a lot of money on. So we never really used it again, I don't think. But, or no, there was a kind of a dreadful episode where the guy who invented a Manny Cotto episode, where a guy
There's no such thing as a dreadful Manakota episode.
The inventor of the transporter came on board, and all I remember is it turned out terribly. One of the great pleasures of working on the show for me was writing with you, Rick. The pilot of Enterprise was the first time we'd written anything together, and it went really well. And I think one of the episodes that really captured the spirit of the show best was a very simple episode, which is called
Shuttlepod 2.
Shuttlepod 1.
One or two or whatever.
And because it really captured the feeling of two guys in space, and they were afraid. They were anxious. They were brave. They were a lot of the things.
It was also an episode that could have been done on a stage.
Yeah,
it was literally two guys.
For all we know, those actors have taken it on the road. But there were emotions in there that Star Trek characters just didn't normally have about being out there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I thought that was really successful, and there were episodes like that.
I remember we had problems even back in the Next Generation days where we had this very futuristic computer that sat on Picard's desk, and then Steve Jobs comes out with a computer that's much cooler and much more streamlined, and so how can we say that this is something that's 400 years in the future when something is available at Best Buy that looks more futuristic? Same thing with the communicator. Kirk and Spock had these flip phones that nobody would even use today. So you had to come up with something that was futuristic, but it couldn't be more futuristic. It had to be futuristic for today, for the audience, but it couldn't be more futuristic than Kirk and Spock or Picard. And we had already passed that point, so it made it very difficult.
It did, but I thought Enterprise was very successful in that it had a nuts and bolts quality to it. I mean, we took it to, I think it was your idea, or Herman Zimmerman, our production designer's idea, to tour a nuclear submarine and make the show a little more cramped. I loved that in Archer's ready room he always had to duck under a beam. So I honestly thought we got it right. Some fans might have disagreed, but the general feeling of the ship I thought was right. Of course, you look today at J.J. Abrams' prequel ship, and it's like something out of, it's so advanced looking to me anyway. The bridge, I thought we nailed it.
No, I think we made the bridge very nuts and bolts. I love the fact that the ready room was. The ready room was something we got out of the submarine. When we went to the submarine, we went down, you, me, and Herman, and we went down to San Diego, and we got onto a small nuclear submarine. It never left port, but we spent, they let us see everything except the nuclear reactor. Nuclear reactor was off limits. But I remember there was a bank of computers, and the guy who was running the computers on the submarine, the sailor, said, none of these are more, he says, these were all built in the 70s, and he says, none of these computers are as powerful as a Palm Pilot.
I asked the Palm Pilot.
Yeah. But then the captain took us into his quarters, and his quarters were like 6 feet by 8 feet. And his ready room was sort of like a little alcove with a desk. And so Herman, kind of using that, decided to make Archer's ready room. I mean, Picard's ready room was this,
He had a fish tank.
He had a fish tank. He had paintings on the walls. He had big tables that people could sit and have meetings at. We made it much more like much more like the submarine.
And we didn't have any paintings on the wall of space, which I always found odd. It would be like being on a sailing ship having pictures of the ocean.
No, actually, we did have in Archer's ready room. There were drawings, black and white drawings, but what they were of all the different enterprises. So there was the the 18th century sailing ship, the Enterprise. There was the aircraft carrier, the Enterprise, and then there was, I think, the spaceship.
Do you know, Rick? I took that.
Did you?
Yeah, I have that.
I'm going to be talking to legal
Paramount
about
Legal.
that.
It was the only. It was I don't know how I got it, but I always loved that. I always loved that piece. And by the way, I got $3,000 for it on eBay. I'm kidding. Did you take anything from the show?
Oh, so much. No, I oddly enough, I never would take anything. Herman would always have a thing. Somebody would come over and just
Give you something.
deliver something, and just to drop it off. So I have a couple of little knickknacks.
Yeah, I'm regretful I didn't even take from the other shows. I have nothing. Not so much as a phaser, you know?
You can't imagine what the actors have.
Oh, really?
Oh, God.
Yeah, I'm sure Patrick Stewart has some good stuff.
Another thing that I was grilled over the coals about to this day was the theme song for the opening credits. And I can't blame Brandon. I can blame Brandon for a lot of things. I don't think I can blame Brandon for that. But we had the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, all of the movies. They all had these big sweeping orchestral Star Trek scores that all had that one major theme to them, and then other things that were added on. And I just thought, wouldn't it be cool if we're doing something new and doing something different? Let's find a song that would be appropriate, that we could put over an opening credit that would show, using visual effects and artwork, that would show the history of flight. And even before that, the history of the sailing ship, the Enterprise, and then all of the early Chuck Yeager and all these, and Peter Lorreson and whoever worked on putting together the opening credit sequence of that is, I mean, it reminds me of like Homeland today has a sequence similar to that. It was a beautiful montage. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a song? And we interviewed a number of people, and we finally met with
Diane Warren.
And she had written this song previously, and she had this British opera singer who was also a pop singer. And I thought the song fit perfectly into what the show was about, what it meant, and I thought it would be kind of cool to do a song. And boy, did the fans hate that. And then I remember at one point, the studio didn't like it much either. And at one point they had us add they had to speed it up a little bit and add some drums to make it a little bit hipper. And then I think finally we lost the lyrics and it just became the music. I don't remember what, but it was it was a bust.
It's do you remember for the longest time when we were creating the imagery, and I think it was a title house that specialized in creating title sequences.
Yes, right,
I don't remember who did it, but they were great. There was a U2 song in there for months that we got really used to because it was cool. I think it was a beautiful day.
Yeah.
And of course, we never would have been able to afford licensing that if they even agreed to it. But I always thought that would have been a good
If it
song.
hadn't been U2, they would have hated it just as much.
Yeah, that's true. I think just in concept, the song threw people off.
But I listened to it recently. I still don't think it was that bad. I think it was kind of cool.
I think it was too much of a departure for people for
So.
the opening credits. No, it's the only thing I didn't like about the song was the orchestrated version at the end credits. I thought they kind of took it too far in the elevator music direction. If you even remember those.
Yeah, Dennis did that. That was part of the score of the show.
But
it was sort of a sullen version of the song.
Yeah.
Sad version of the song.
Of course, there was a Manny Cotto episode where which was a Mirror Universe episode where he got rid of the song. They were had a badass military version of the show. I'm trying to think of if there were any other difficult aspects of creating the show. I know that the writing was a challenge in the first season. I had a lot of trouble getting the right mix of writers.
Most of the writers who we had kind of carried along with us and had worked their way up the ladder from the various shows had all gone off into different places, and you had this sort of awesome responsibility of trying to put together a whole new.
But it was
staff.
we both did really, and as you can attest, having been there from the beginning, for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe it's me. It seemed to me that it was just hard to find people who could get Star Trek, the voice of Star Trek, right. It was so specific, and yet not. It's like writing a period piece in a funny way, but it's the future, and it has science in it. It does, whether it's real or not. It's got to sound real, and that takes a certain knack.
And it's got a hokiness to it, which is natural when you got people wearing weird rubber faces.
But you know what? The key is to take it seriously, even though it still may come off as hokey at times.
Well, I think we always did.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a mainstream. I remember I was dating a woman who, during Next Generation, who had never seen the show, and she said regarding Worf, "Why does he look like an animal?" People just, if you didn't know Star Trek, it must have just seemed like this weird, very strange thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, as I've always said, the greatest satisfaction that I ever got out of doing all of these series was how many people would come to you and say how much it meant to you. It meant to them.
Yeah.
That how many people would say, this is the only appointment television we have in our week, and the family sits down and watches it, and then we discuss it afterwards, and it was a big responsibility for us in a funny way, because people took this.
Yeah, Rick, I got to tell you, it's hard for me to imagine you doing a Star Trek convention. Almost impossible to imagine. However, I know you've done them.
I did two.
You did two, exactly two. One, of course, at Royal Albert Hall. I guess it would have to be the right venue for you.
That's true.
Well,
one was because Roddenberry was supposed to do it, but he passed away, and I did that one. And then the second one was the Royal Albert Hall.
But I don't know if you experienced this, but I do maybe one a year, for usually just the one in Vegas because it's close and it's Vegas. But interacting with the fans is that kind of experience. You know, a lot of them don't have much to say or ask the questions you might expect, but there are that handful of those people who the show has moved in some very deep way.
But don't you fear running into all those people who think that you and I are the devil incarnate?
It crosses my mind.
But you don't run into them? You don't have people attack you?
Oh, no one's attacked me. Oh, there's been some nasty...
I mean, verbally attacking.
You know, in person, people are generally different than they are behind their keyboards when nobody knows, their true identity. I find people are generally... But, it's entirely possible. I have had a couple moments more, and I've been recognized probably exactly twice in my entire life in public, but both times it was unnerving because I was alone. I was not in a place where there were a lot of people, and someone said, "Are you Brannon Braga?" And it's not a good thing when you look both behind you, and it's.
The greatest answer to that question is no.
Is no. That's absolutely right. I've had as recently as this past Labor Day, I had Star Trek fans show up at my house. I was sitting by the pool. My family was there. We were barbecuing, and my nephew comes out and says, "There are two men at the door for you. One black guy, one white guy." And he said, "One's wearing a suit." And I said, "Well, who are they?" And he says, "I don't know." And of course, in my paranoia, I'm thinking, are they cops? What have I done? What have I done? But I go out there.
I sent them, Brandon.
But they were Star Trek fans, and they had found my address on the internet, and my house has no protection whatsoever. I shouldn't be saying this on tape, but they found my address, and they wanted autographs and say hello. And it turned out to be this one guy showed me these pictures. He's like a collector of Star Trek things. He has the shuttle pod in his garage. Not the hero one, the one with all the inside. He has it in his garage, along with his SUV.
Did he buy it in the auction, or did he steal it?
He bought it from like a prop house for like $25,000, and he's got it. He's restored it. The electronics work, and it's next. I swear to God, it's next to his minivan in his garage, and that's where that ended up. That thing.
That's.
I'm not sure how to feel about that. Yeah, it's not at the Smithsonian. Let's put it that way. I was home with a woman, an Italian astronomer. I don't know if you remember her.
I do.
You remember her?
Mm-hmm.
And my phone rang, and some voice on the phone said, "Look outside your window." And my house. And I looked outside. They hung up, and my house had been toilet papered. It must have been someone I knew, or not. I don't know, but it was a good toilet paper job. And it was right around time. And we got Ron Moore and I got some death threats on the phone, I think.
Was this for Generations?
This was around the time, this was during the first couple weeks of the release of Generations, that people were upset about Kirk. I still get asked about that.
I find it so strange, because people talk about the fact that I or we were responsible for killing Kirk, and how could we have done that? And it was such a logical thing. I mean, we sat down to write this movie, and at the story stage of the movie, and the feeling was that the studio didn't want us to have any of the original series people in it at all. It was a Next Generation movie, and we thought we should pay homage to these guys. We should somehow pass the torch. And well, how the hell do you do that when you've got, I mean, Kirk's been dead Kirk is I don't know if he's ever mentioned in Next Generation. Is he mentioned?
No, I don't think so. I think you guys were pretty cognizant to kind of keep them separate, those shows.
So,
until, Scotty would make an appearance, but no, I don't think so.
Well, we had DeForest Kelley was in
the pilot.
The pilot, so he was, but that was because he had lived to be like 200 or something like that. But Kirk was obviously dead by the time we got to Generations. And our thought was, what if we bring him back to life and have him die again, but in a way that's going to save Earth or save a planet or whatever. We were resurrecting him by creating this whole ribbon idea, and then having him die at the end.
It's actually you bring up a point I've never considered, which is that he was already dead. It's actually a great point. We didn't kill Kirk. Kirk died. We resurrected him and killed and took him out of a temporal anomaly.
Well, we resurrected him and let him give his life towards saving the entire inhabitants of a planet.
Yeah.
And we were accused of killing Kirk.
Yeah, it's actually not true. I've never thought about it that way before. We're accused of killing the franchise, Rick. I mean,
That's true. I was accused of killing Data in the movie Nemesis, where in fact Brent Spiner
co-story
specifically stated that he would not do the movie unless he died at the end. That was a provision,
right,
of his being involved in the film.
Yeah, it's interesting because I stand by Enterprise 1,000%. I think the show should have continued. I'm not afraid to say I don't think the network got the show, and I don't think they were behind the show. I think they were somewhat hostile toward the show. I don't think they're going to be very hostile toward Star Trek when they resurrect the next series. They're going to make a lot of money, but I didn't feel that it was a welcoming place for the show, and the show ended before it should have ended.
Well, we during Voyager and Enterprise, we dealt with at least 3 completely different administrations at the network. And the first 2 were very supportive. And then a whole new group of people came in. There was some degree of hostility. I think a lot of the hostility had to do with the fact that they had been told that we had been given carte blanche for 16 years, and they were not about to buy into that. And that
Absolutely.
we didn't take notes, and they weren't about to buy into that.
The first real notes meetings we would have were with this regime. I'm not going to name any names, but some of the notes were some of the worst notes I've ever heard.
Because the network was getting younger and younger, and they were really trying to deal with an audience of young women, young girls, it was seriously suggested to us that in the mess hall we have a
band playing.
a band of young guys.
But they also were like, and maybe a different group every week. Like they can get the hottest. We're going to get the hottest young bands out there, and we were like, where are we going to put them? Well, you have that restaurant on the ship, don't you? They didn't know what it was called. They didn't. I think I was trying to pitch a story for the season. I used the word hull. They didn't know what a hull was.
That's one of my favorite stories.
Tell me, because I don't remember it.
We were pitching this story. Again, I won't mention any names, but we're dealing with one of the highest ranking people at this network. And we're explaining how we are writing an episode where there's a fire out on the hull, and the guys have to get into spacesuits and walk out on the hull of the ship, and they go across the hull, and they have to put this fire out, and one of them da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And there's like 5 of them sitting around the table, and they're all nodding and kind of going, that's great. And then there's one person in question, one of the highest, if not the highest ranking person in the room, said, I just have one question. What's a hull? And I said, it's the outside of the ship. It's the.
But that to me, as ludicrous and funny as it sounds, it wasn't particularly funny at the time, because it was a different. The most I could say, it was a different feeling. We had, in large part thanks to you, Rick, the efficient, successful production that you had set up, the architecture of this modern day Star Trek that you had established and sustained, which is, I find it funny that the people who say that you were in part responsible for killing the franchise built the franchise. It's easy to remember the good times, I suppose. And nothing lasts forever. You used to say even Gunsmoke was canceled, It's like, who was responsible for the death of Gunsmoke? Who was running Gunsmoke at the time Gunsmoke went down?
Who killed Bonanza?
Who killed Bonanza? What about I Love Lucy? How about the Andy Griffith Show? The show was on for a collectively 18 years. Nothing lasts forever. And I'm not saying that
collectively, it was, not collectively. It was 18 years, but there were 25 seasons because 7 of those years had two shows.
That's right. So collectively 25 years. And I got to tell you, I can't look to Enterprise, and I'm sure there will still be fans that disagree. I cannot, and I'm not saying there weren't problems with the show, and I'll take a blame for it, especially that first season, when I was struggling personally to try to find the voice of the show. The show was a good show. And the most I'll say for those crazy network people who just didn't understand it, it did push us to some degree when we were called into Jonathan Dolgen's office to say, what the are you going to do with the show? What are you going to do that's different next year? We did a 3rd season, which I thought was one of the best seasons of Star Trek I've ever been part of. The Xindi thing. There were science fiction ideas in there that I thought were just great. I thought it was a really successful season of television. I've made the mistake of reading some of these bulletin postings. I don't anymore, but there was a time when I did.
Oh, sure you do.
Well, no,
Sure
I don't, because they're not writing about me, Rick. They're not. They were writing something I would, but the times, and there was a point where, because in my much smaller way, was there when Next Generation was ascending into this phenomenon, and I read a few posts saying, if you really look back at Braga's episodes, they sucked. They actually weren't that great. So you just can't, it's like revisionist history. Do you know what I'm saying?
A psychologist would love to get a hold of both of us, because back in the early days when we would get these things, whenever anybody wrote something good about us, we would ignore it. All we would do is we would just look for the people who would say horrible things, and we would sit and fret.
I mean, Star Trek was there for the transition from fan mail, which I don't think we really read, and the internet.
Well, I was explaining that you used to send me over. You'd have your assistant send me over like Xeroxed printed pages off of a computer or something like that of fan comments about the show.
Yeah, no, I remember that. It was so new at the time. It was immediate feedback.
And now today you go onto these sites and they'll tell you what the actors in J.J. Abrams' movie had for lunch.
Yeah. They need content, but it was not. I don't want to dwell on the negative, but it was not. It's just not fun to think of yourself as the person who was responsible for killing the franchise, but it's just so ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous because, and I'll tell you, if Enterprise really sucked, if you look back at that show and said, "Oh my God," maybe I could see, but the writing was on the wall, and I'm not making excuses. The ratings of Star Trek were steadily, they weren't there with. I think it started actually on Voyager.
It started on Deep Space Nine.
Oh,
Deep Space Nine numbers started falling, then Voyager's numbers started falling. They all decayed, and you can come up with any one of not a million, but you can come up with any one of a dozen reasons for why this happened.
I got to tell you, the two most common questions I get probably about Star Trek are, what do you think makes Star Trek so enduring and popular, and why do you think Star Trek got canceled? What happened? And you can't ask both, really. They're kind of.
Also, I think a show that runs 4 full seasons is not a failure. I mean, most television shows don't run one season, and few run 2.
But it's being compared, of course, to
the ones that ran 7.
Yeah, the original ran 3, 4,
3, and they tried to cancel it after the first year, and then they tried to cancel it again after the second year, and then they successfully canceled it after the third year. But the only reason they canceled Next Generation after 7 years was because of the actors' deals were getting too expensive, and they wanted to do a movie. So they decided that would be the 7-year thing, and then Deep Space Nine and Voyager both ran 7 years.
I wanted to ask you something because I can't really remember. Speaking of the original series, we were going to do a 2-part Kirk episode on Enterprise. Do you remember this?
Oh, I remember it very well.
Because, and I remember having lunch.
We went to lunch on Melrose Avenue, and we brought Ago, and we brought Manny with us.
Right.
And he was like, Manny had never met Bill Shatner, and he could not believe he was having lunch with Bill Shatner. It was so great.
But do you remember what?
Yes, I remember.
I can't remember what the idea of the episode was. I remember you and I taking long walks on the beach in Malibu talking about what the story for Kirk would be. I cannot remember the story. Do you remember it?
The reason that we went to have lunch was because Bill had called and said he had this great idea. It was Bill's storyline, and I do not remember it at all. Oh. But it was fine, and without getting into specifics, I'll make an analogy. When we did the movie Generations, we had this character named Soren, who was the bad guy, who was, I guess it got out to the casting people around that we were doing a Star Trek movie and that there was a bad guy in it. And I got a call saying that Marlon Brando was interested in playing the role. And I just couldn't believe it. And I was so excited. And I was Jesus, Martin, great. Who cares how fat he is? And I went to see the president of the studio, and I said, Marlon Brando wants to play Soren. And the response was, "What does he want?" And I remember the president of the studio just laughing at me. And that was the end of that. Well, here we had Shatner at the height of a time where it would have been great to do a two-part weird time travel kind of Kirk thing. And he had actually worked out a whole storyline. And we sat down at this restaurant, I remember at the window table, and he told us the story, and we thought it was great. And I got back to my office, and his agent called me. And I don't even think he had an agent at the time. I think it was like his lawyer. I might be wrong. And said, "Bill wants X number of dollars to do this." And this number was it was so ridiculous. It was there's a thing in television called the top of the show, which is the most you pay a guest actor, and this was like 20 times higher than that. And I called McCluggage and I mentioned it to McCluggage, and he laughed the same way I had gotten the Marlon Brando laugh about it. And in doing an interview recently with Bill, he said to me, "You know, I came up with this great two-part episode, and I pitched it to you guys, and I just never heard from you again about it." And I said, "Bill, that's not the way it was. It was you wanted a obscene amount of money to do it, and the studio said no." Everybody remembers things differently.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's too bad. It would have been, it actually, unlike the Brando thing, I think it would have been good for the show.
Yeah.
But in a funny way, I understand it. You know, when Shatner plays a role, it's one thing. When Shatner plays Kirk, I guess it's a different number, you know.
It's true.
It's a shame, too, because I don't know that he'll ever play Kirk again. That would have been probably the last time.
Well, he's 81 years old.
But he looks amazing.
He does look great,
It's
yeah.
incredible, really. I flew back from London with next to him on the plane. And he just has unrelenting energy.
Oh, yeah.
He was up the whole flight. I slept for most of the flight, and he just sat up and read. He's completely lucid. I mean, he's actually, it's kind of amazing. We should all be so lucky at age 81.
Be lucky just to get to age 81.
No kidding. But one of the things that I may be misremembering, but I believe, and maybe I'm just making this up, Future Guy from the Temporal Cold War, we had thrown around a lot of ideas about who Future Guy is going to be, a Romulan. But I thought the most interesting idea that we came up with was that it was going to be Archer himself.
Mm-hmm.
And an Archer from some sort of terrible future where he in some way was responsible for doing something wrong with it, but he's manipulating himself. And if you go back and look, it could very well have been Archer.
Well, the idea in the pilot, we have this character who we learn is from the future. We also learn that this character is using the Suliban, that this character is somehow giving the Suliban the technology to alter themselves genetically to serve Future Guy's purpose, whatever that is. And right now, in the pilot, I think Future Guy wanted to create tumult within the Klingon Empire.
That's right.
Which all had to do with the message that that Klang, what was his
DNA?
name?
It was in his DNA.
He was in his DNA. And for reasons that obviously nobody knew, somebody from the future who only could be communicated in this strange chamber on board the Suliban vessel was giving them instructions and wanted the Klingon Empire to destroy themselves. And this was, in our minds, I think this was all part of some bizarre master plan that was happening way in the future. And we never called this guy Future Guy. Some fan started calling him Future Guy. And then there was questions of, could Future Guy be Archer? Could Future Guy be...
People were hoping he was a Romulan, because Romulans hadn't made an appearance yet.
J.J. Abrams was one of the things that people thought.
I thought it'd be J.J.
But we in fact never fleshed it out.
We never got a chance to. I mean, we had a lot of ideas, and I thought, Manny in season 4 kind of set the temporal Cold War aside as best I could. I guess he wasn't that interested in it, but and it did get kind of convoluted. But I was disappointed that we were never able to do that. I wanted to take Archer to the 29th century. I think we may have discussed that at some point.
The whole concept of when we put those three words together, temporal Cold War, there was something really cool about the possibilities, about a kind of a stagnant warlike situation that existed in time as opposed to
it would be a better show in a contemporary way. In other words, I think we talked about that for fun. Time travel was invented in 1996, and some terrible accident happened that none of us know about. And the nations that invented it, 3-4 nations, secretly did a temporal accord never to use it again, but they're all paranoid, so they all have agents in the 1950s. You could do a Cold War within a Cold War. The Russians and the Americans both have agents from 2013 in the 50s. You could do some really postmodern kind of thing with the temporal Cold War. Do you remember the book, the novelization of the Enterprise pilot in hardcover that came out around the time the show did by Diane Carey, that it was very obvious in reading many passages that she hated the pilot script and was making her own meta commentary on the show. Do you remember this?
I vaguely do, yeah.
It's filled with passages commenting on how the script is. I can't remember it exactly, but so Trip and Reed found themselves in front of two stripper girls eating butterflies. A ridiculous concept, even on an alien world. That anybody, just like...
This is in the novelization.
This is in the novelization. And just like commenting on how stupid characters were. And no good Starfleet captain would have done this, but Captain Archer was no ordinary Star Trek captain. But it was filled, and I don't know if it was you or me called just to say, hey, we think this is funny, but you should know that this author has put...
That you've licensed the book.
Obviously, an editor missed the fact that she hates the show, and it's reeking with hatred from beginning to end. And I don't remember exactly what happened. I think maybe she was reprimanded. That's absolutely true. I remember, and I don't remember at what stage we talked about a movie idea about some terrible threat to the galaxy that was going to require the greatest minds that Starfleet had to offer, and we were going to get Picard, Data, like Odo. We're going to get all the holographic doctor. We're going to get all the Star Trek characters on one ship, like a think tank. Do you remember this? You don't remember this, do you? Mm-hmm. It was a cool idea. It was kind of like with the Avengers. It was like Star Trek: The Avengers, which, by the way, is still a good idea.
It's still a good idea.
Yeah.
You might as well throw Kirk in there as well.
Star Trek's bigger than, Rick was involved longer than any one single individual that wasn't an actor or anybody with the franchise. Was it 18, 19 years?
18.
18 years. I was 15. But it will go on. It was in Nick Meyer's hands for a time. It was in Harv Bennett's hands. There were a lot of people squealing about Star Wars going onto Disney, but it's no different than Star Trek. It's Star Wars is bigger than George Lucas now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it just? I mean, the franchise will go into new hands, and maybe great things will be done with it. You know, for crying out loud. I don't know if you get this question. People are like, would you ever do Star Trek again? My answer is no, probably.
Yeah,
I mean, it's hard to imagine. You know?
I don't get asked questions like that too often, but when I do, my answer is no. I did it for 18 years, and
it was great.
And when the day comes that somebody creates a new Star Trek television series, I will not have a drop of animosity toward it. God bless them.
Absolutely. By the way, I've done Star Trek longer than any one thing in my life. It's occupied most of my adult life. I love Star Trek. I hope it's good.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking forward to seeing it.
But there's not a drop of bitterness.
Oh no. No, of course not. We did it. Well, there is a drop, and that is I think Enterprise should have continued. That's my. But then again, it had a good run. I have nothing but nostalgia about the show, and at one time it seems like yesterday, and another time it seems like an eon ago. How about you, Rick?
You stole my line. There are times where I feel I'll run into somebody like Connor Trenier, and I'll feel like I'll see you tomorrow on the set. And there are other times where it feels like it was 30 years ago, like it was like some kind of strange dream. But it was all fun. And to me, the most fun was the time we spent writing, because I had never really done it to that degree, anywhere close to that degree before, and we had so much fun writing.
Yeah, we did. We wrote, I don't know how many episodes we did, but you'd be surprised at how many there were.
I think over 30.
It was, yeah, I agree. That was the most fun thing, and I miss those days.